Good afternoon. Fancy the Answer Dog and I are going to do the third and final portion of the skeletal muscular system, focusing on muscles. We're going to take a look at some specific muscles and then talk a little bit about muscles and how they relate to other systems in the body and things of that nature. And this should help you fill out the final portion of your PowerPoint so that you can prepare yourself for the quiz, especially if you've missed part of the lecture or something of that sort. So here we go. We're going to look at specific muscles, and we're not going to do an exhaustive list of all the muscles. We're going to try to do a selected group of some of the more important muscles. Some will be omitted. And we're going to start with the muscles of mastication. Mastication is the chewing of your food, and we will talk a bit more about the importance of chewing your food when we get to the gastrointestinal tract, and a lecture on that, which will be in Physiology 2, AandP7. There are going to be 4 pairs of muscles that are responsible for mastication. We're only going to deal with 2 of them, 2 of the more important ones. And one is going to be the masseter muscle. Masseter muscle is a prime mover for elevating the mandible. It's one of 2 prime movers. Elevating the mandible, if we were in nursery school, we'd say you were closing your mouth. And the second prime mover for elevation of the mandible is the temporalis. That also, and you can see that's pulling on the coracoid process of the mandible. I didn't mention this, but the masseter comes, it partly originates from the zygomatic arch, which is made up of both the zygomatic bone and the temporal bone. Then we're going to have muscles that move the head. And we're going to look at 2 superficial muscles. One is sternocleidomastoid. In a cat, if you've studied cat anatomy, you'd see that these are 2 muscles. There's a sternomastoid and a cleidomastoid. But in humans, there's one. It splits, part of it originating on the manubrium and the other part from the clavicle. So it's going to flex the head if only one side is contracting. And it's going to flex the head if both sides are contracting. It's going to rotate the head if only one side contracts. Trapezius, we're going to talk about the trapezius again when we get to muscles that moor the scapula. But the trapezius is also important in moving the head. It extends the head, and in fact, part of it attaches to the superior nuchal line and the external occipital protuberance of the occipital bone. It does affect the scapula. It elevates, retracts, rotates, and depresses the scapula, but we'll deal with that more when we get to the muscles that moor the scapula. We have muscles of the trunk. There are muscles in the thoracic wall. They primarily are helpful in breathing, and then we also have muscles in the abdominal wall. They too are helpful in breathing. They contribute to the abdominal press. The abdominal press is important not just for breathing but for other things as well. And when you have the abdominal press, that aids in expiration. In the thoracic wall, one muscle helps in expiration, another muscle helps in inspiration. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And in the abdominal wall, the muscles also are going to protect and support the abdominal viscera. Remember, there are no ribs in the abdominal wall, so we rely on the muscles of the abdominal wall for those functions. Here we're looking at the external intercostal muscle, and you'll notice that the muscle moves obliquely between the ribs, and so when this muscle contracts, these muscles, when they contract, they elevate the ribs, and when you elevate the ribs, you inspire. And they have the same origin as the external abdominal oblique, which we'll see in the abdominal region. Okay, so it elevates the ribs and helps you inspire. Here are the internal intercostal muscles. Internal intercostal muscles also go obliquely between the ribs, but instead of going anteriorly as they descend, they go posteriorly. And so it should not be too much of a surprise that when they contract, they do not elevate the ribs, rather they depress the ribs. And when you depress the ribs, that aids in expiration. The internal intercostal, I didn't write this down here, but the internal intercostal has the same origin as the internal abdominal oblique, one of the abdominal muscles. And then we have the diaphragm. Diaphragm is considered part of the thoracic wall, and it aids both in inspiration and expiration. It's dome-shaped. It's actually a double dome. There's a dome on the right side that extends superiorly more than the dome on the left side. And the fact that it's a double-domed muscle is the reason that it was named for a famous anatomist who later became the headmaster at Hogwarts, Albus Dumbledore. Wow. We have the abdominal wall muscles. We have external abdominal oblique. You'll recall that that comes from the same origin as the external intercostal muscle. This muscle has two major functions. It does assist in trunk rotation and in the abdominal press. And then we have the internal abdominal oblique. Internal abdominal oblique has the same origin as the internal intercostal muscle. It too is involved in trunk rotation and the abdominal press. And then we have the transverse abdominis. Transverse abdominis is the same muscle layer as the innermost intercostal. We didn't talk about that one, but the transverse abdominis is associated with the abdominal press, but not the rotation of the trunk. That abdominal press, I think I mentioned, is responsible for about 5 major physiological activities. One of which is expiration. We have rectus abdominis. Rectus abdominis is sometimes called the washboard muscle or the six-pack muscle. If you have a friend that refers to their six-pack, you should tell them that they're too short. They actually should have an 8-pack. So you see there's 1 segment, 2, 3, 4 on each side, total of 8. So it is an 8-pack muscle, not a 6-pack muscle. And this is going to do a couple of things. One is it assists in the abdominal press, but it also sort of acts like suspenders because it attaches to your pelvic girdle and it stabilizes the pelvis when you're walking, a lot like suspenders would stabilize your pants. We have muscles of the shoulder. So the muscles of the shoulder are going to insert on the scapula. They stabilize the scapula. Sometimes they're referred to as the muscles that moor the scapula. They hold the scapula in one place so that muscles that leave the scapula and go to other bones, for example the humerus, can move the humerus and not move the scapula. Okay, and these are all going to originate on the axial skeleton. So the trapezius, we already talked about trapezius. Remember, that was one of the muscles that move the head, but it has a huge impact for the scapula. It's going to elevate, retract, rotate, and depress the scapula. I did not add in here that it moves the head, but it does. It has the ability to extend the head. Here we have serratus anterior, and in an earlier Camtasia, I talked about the fact that some muscles have a shape, and I said that I would later on talk about why the serratus looks serrated. You can see it looks like a serrated knife here, and the reason you can see in this drawing quite nicely, it goes to the ribs, but there's nothing in between the ribs to attach to. So it doesn't make a nice smooth margin. It makes a jagged margin because of those attachments. This is going to protract and rotate the scapula. In some books they talk about it in terms of it being a muscle of respiration. It does have the ability to move the ribs since it attaches to the ribs, but it would only do that if you held the scapula steady so that when it contracted, the scapula wouldn't move. Then we have muscles that insert on the arm. These are going to be muscles that move the arm since they insert on the arm. And we can start with the deltoid. So the deltoid is a triangular shaped muscle, and it's the prime flexor, meaning it provides most of the strength in flexing your arm. It's a prime abductor, most of the strength in abducting your arm. It also extends and hyperextends the arm and laterally and medially rotates the arm. It has a lot of hats served by the axillary nerve. And then we have pectoralis major. Pectoralis major, again, is going to have a series of activities, adducts, flexes, and medially rotates the arm. And it has the potential to extend the arm, but this in part depends on what position the arm is in. So if you already flexed your arm and then you contract pectoralis major, it will extend it. We have latissimus dorsi. Latissimus dorsi is an unusual muscle. in that it extends, hyperextends, adducts, and medially rotates the arm. That's not particularly unusual. In fact, all of those things are things that teres major, we're not going to talk about teres major, but teres major does the same things with the exception of hyperextension. The thing that's really unusual and interesting about a latissimus dorsi is right down here it attaches to your pelvis. And most people would not say, oh, you know, muscles attaching the pelvis must move the arm. You would think of muscles attaching the pelvis would move your lower appendage. But this one does attach there, and it does move the arm. And then we have the rotator cuff muscles. There are 4 of them. We have supraspinatus. Supraspinatus is an abductor of the arm. You can see it up here. These muscles have been removed. Teres minor and infraspinatus have been cut away. Over here we have the rhomboids, by the way. This is rhomboideus major and rhomboideus minor. We have infraspinatus. Infraspinatus is a lateral rotator of the humerus, and it has a little helper called teres minor. So there won't be any other examples in this lecture talking about little helpers, but the little helper simply means that this muscle does exactly the same thing as the muscle it helps. They both are lateral rotators of the humerus. And this will actually come up in our discussion of the brachial plexus. We have subscapularis. Subscapularis is a medial rotator of the arm. It's the only one of the rotator cuff muscles that medially rotates the arm. There are actually 4 other medial rotators that were under the muscles that move the arm. And this is kind of a neat picture. This is a cadaver picture. It's missing biceps brachii. It's been removed. So here's coracobrachialis right here, and this is brachialis. And the pectoral muscles have been removed. Well, also remember I talked about sternocleidomastoid splitting when it comes from its origins. You can see that split right here. Here's the part that comes from the manubrium, and here's the part that comes from the clavicle. Okay, next we have muscles that insert in the forearm, and there are 2 possibilities. If they insert on the ulna, all they do is either flex or extend the forearm. But if they insert on the radius, they may also pronate or supinate in addition to whatever else they do. And the reason is that the ulna can only flex and extend, whereas the radius can flex, extend, and rotate. And that's the difference there. So here we have biceps brachii. Biceps brachii actually inserts in 2 places. It inserts on the bicipital or radial tuberosity of the radius and on the bicipital aponeurosis. And because it goes to the radius, it means that it has the potential to rotate. So it does. It supinates the forearm, and it also is going to flex the forearm. And then the short head is the piece that goes to the coracoid process of the scapula. The short head is responsible for flexion of the arm, although that's definitely not its strongest input. Here's brachialis. Brachialis is much simpler. It just does one thing. It flexes the forearm. And if it flexes the forearm, you know that it must attach to which bone? Right, the ulna, because the ulna doesn't rotate. We have triceps brachii. Triceps brachii has 3 heads. One head, the long head, goes up and attaches to the infraglenoid tubercle of the scapula, and then that would be this head. That's a long head. Then we have the lateral head and the medial heads, both of which attach to the humerus, and this extends the forearm. The long head also extends and adducts the arm, but its primary strength is in extension of the forearm. The muscles that insert on the bones of the hand, well, it depends on what bones they insert on. They're either going to flex or extend the wrist, or they're going to flex the digits and the wrist, or extend the digits and the wrist. Okay, so the muscles that go to the phalanges are the ones that are going to flex both the digits and the wrist, or extend the digits and the wrist. So here we have flexor carpi radialis. Flexor carpi radialis goes to the carpal bones. The name tells you it flexes them. And because it's on the lateral side, it's also an abductor of the wrist. Here we have flexor carpi ulnaris, because it tells you that it flexes the carpals. It does. And it goes to the ulnar side, so that means it's an adductor of the wrist in addition to flexing the wrist. Here we have the extensor carpi radialis longus. So extends the carpals, it tells you that. It's on the radial side, so it's also an abductor of the wrist. And then we have extensor carpi radialis brevis. It does exactly the same thing as extensor carpi radialis longus. We have extensor carpi ulnaris. Because it's on the ulnar side, it's going to adduct the wrist, and because the name tells you, it also extends the wrist. So extends and adducts. And then we have flexor digitorum superficialis. Flexor digitorum superficialis tells you tells you it flexes the digits. It does, and because the muscle flexes the digits, it also flexes the wrist. The digits we're referring to here are digits 2 through 5. The thumb has its own set of muscles. So when we talk about some extensor or flexor of a digit, it doesn't do the thumb specifically. Flexor digitorum profundus is deep to flexor digitorum superficialis, and it flexes digits 2 through 5, and it flexes the wrist because it flexes the digits. Then we have extensor digitorum. That's going to extend the digits and the wrist, and again, it's digits 2 through 5. Next, we're going to move to the lower extremity. So we have muscles that move the lower limb, and these muscles have at least one origin on the os coxa, that's the pelvic girdle, and they insert on the femur. So they're going to either extend or flex. They're going to abduct or adduct the thigh, depending on their position. So we can start with iliopsoas. Iliopsoas is a combination muscle. It's a combination of psoas major and iliacus, and it's the prime flexor of the thigh, so that's a really big deal. But it also has the ability to flex and laterally bend the lumbar region of the trunk. By the way, just as a point of information, this is the iliacus in green, and this is the psoas major in pink here. If any of you have ever had tenderloin, you had the psoas major. So next time you go to a restaurant, you want to have tenderloin, ask them if they have psoas major, and if the wait staff knows what they're talking about, they will get you tenderloin. Here we have gluteus maximus, the largest of the gluteal muscles. It's going to extend and laterally rotate the thigh, and it does some other things kind of additionally, but you can end up with a ridiculous list of actions. So these are the primary actions for gluteus maximus. Then we have gluteus medius. Gluteus medius, important for medial rotation of the thigh as well as abduction of the thigh. It's an abductor, and it also takes part in the movement referred to as the pelvic tilt. Pelvic tilt occurs when you're walking. Now when you lift, let's say your left foot, the left side of your pelvis elevates so that you don't drag your foot, and the elevation occurs because of the quadratus lumborum on the left side. On the right side, the gluteus medius maintains the position of the hip so that it doesn't move superiorly. Here we have pectineus. Pectineus is going to adduct and flex the thigh. It is usually considered part of the medial compartment of the thigh. Adductor longus, also part of the medial compartment. It adducts and flexes the thigh. Adductor magnus, there's actually two heads to this. It's sometimes referred to as adductor femoris. There's adductor femoris or adductor magnus et brevis. Magnus is the large head, and it is an adductor and flexor of the thigh, also in the medial compartment. We have gracilis. That's another medial compartment muscle. And this one, though, goes across both joints, both the hip and the knee. So it's an adductor, flexor, and medial rotator of the thigh. And because it goes across the knee, it also is a flexor of the leg. This is one of the pes anserine muscles. Pes anserine means goosefoot. There are 3 of them. They help stabilize the knee, and the insertion on the medial side of the knee, it looks like a goosefoot. That's where they get their name. And that would include gracilis, sartorius, and semitendinosus. Okay, so next we're going to have muscles that move the leg. They have an origin on the os coxa or the femur, and they insert on the tibia. So they're going to extend or flex the leg. And this is going to include the 4 muscles of the quadriceps. Quadriceps rectus femoris Rectus femoris is the only one of the quadriceps that goes across both joints, though it flexes the hip and extends the leg. We have quadriceps vastus lateralis, just extends the leg, stabilizes the knee. We have quadriceps vastus medialis, extends and stabilizes the knee. And then we have vastus intermedius, which just extends the knee or extends the leg. Sometimes I vacillate between going to the body part that moves or the joint that moves. As far as I'm concerned, it really doesn't matter which one you use. Either one is fine. Sartorius is an interesting muscle. Sartorius is sometimes referred to as the Taylor's muscle. It's the longest muscle in the human body, and it has 5 functions. It's going to flex and immediately rotate the thigh, and it flexes the leg. And I put that it's an adductor, but that's not right. It's an abductor, so I will have to correct that. I'm sorry about that. So you should put right here AB duct, not AD duct. And then we have, and the reason it's called a Taylor's muscle back down to Sartorius is because tailors used to use that muscle to position their upper limb, their thigh and leg, so that they could use their leg and thigh as a workbench. We have the hamstring group. There are 3 muscles in the hamstring group. We have the biceps femoris with 2 heads. It's going to extend the thigh and flex and laterally rotate the leg. We have semimembranosus, which is going to extend the thigh, flex the leg, and medially rotate the leg in conjunction with semitendinosus. And then we have semitendinosus. Semitendinosus extends the thigh, flexes the leg, and is a medial rotator of the leg. We get down into the leg itself. We have the gastrocnemius. The gastrocnemius, sometimes called a high heel muscle, goes across 2 joints. It flexes the knee and plantar flexes the foot. Depending on what you're doing with your appendage, it has the potential to move both joints since it goes across both joints. And we have tibialis anterior. Tibialis anterior is going to be a dorsiflexor as well as an inverter of the foot. You can see this foot is inverting a little bit. When you invert your feet, the soles of your feet come toward each other. And then we have fibularis or peroneus longus. This is going to plantar flex and evert the foot. And we have fibularis brevis, which plantar flexes and everts the foot. They're going to the lateral side. Eversion of the foot is when your soles of your feet go away from each other. And then we have flexor digitorum longus, going to flex the toes, as the name would imply. And we have extensor digitorum longus, which is going to extend the toes. Okay, so that was kind of a quick introduction to those muscles. You should be spending some time working on those muscles in lab, and I'm hopeful that you were able to sort of bring all that information to a synthesis of understanding about how the muscles work. Okay, so that brings us to the effects of aging. And when a person ages, there are decreases in a number of things. One is the mass of their muscles, the strength of their muscles. The muscle mass actually starts to be replaced by connective tissue and then eventually fat. Mitochondria degenerate, and that means they're going to be less capable, those cells that remain, less capable of generating ATP, which means they weaken. There are also going to be changes in the nervous system and cardiovascular system that have negative impact on the muscles and their ability to do what they used to do when the person was younger. And one of the things that can help offset these changes is exercise. If a person exercises regularly, you can actually diminish the impact of that. In terms of homeostasis, how do muscles play a role? Well, they have a lot of different roles, and we'll go through those. We have cardiac muscle. Obviously, it's going to be important for creating blood pressure to move the blood. We have smooth muscle that does a number of things. It can affect blood pressure. Remember, we had tunica media. Actually, we haven't done the cardiovascular yet. We will be doing the cardiovascular system. That's in AandP2. But you'll see that the tunica media of the blood vessels helps maintain blood pressure when the heart is relaxed, and that moves the blood. We also have sphincters in the gastrointestinal tract that are made out of smooth muscle, and they direct the flow of material within the gastrointestinal tract. In the gastrointestinal tract, muscular contractions mix the material in the GI tract, and that's going to aid in two things. One is digestion of the material by mixing the food with the enzymes, but it also is going to facilitate absorption by having more material come up against the mucosa by this turbulence within the system. If you didn't have that turbulence, it would you would have less absorption. The smooth muscles are going to be responsible for creating pressure to move urine out of the urinary bladder, making your urinary bladder flatter. The skeletal muscle is going to be important in a number of capacities. We talked about this already a little bit. We have the skeletal muscle pump, which moves the blood and lymphatic fluids through the body, or helps move it anyway, creates pressure gradients to allow for movement. The abdominal wall muscles are protective of the organs that are deep to the wall. It's going to create pressure that moves air in and out of the lungs for respiration. We're going to have skeletal muscles play a role in thermoregulation. When you're cold, you shiver, and when you shiver, you have muscular contractions. More than half of the energy released by the contractions comes off as heat, and so that's good news if you're cold because it warms you up. Obviously, it's bad news if you're warm already because it warms you up, and then that becomes sort of a problem for you to deal with. Skeletal muscles stabilize the skeletal system, so you can stand up and not fall down. And then skeletal muscles help strengthen bones. When you have muscles pulling on the bones bone material actually reworks and strengthens the bone itself. Skeletal muscles can stabilize joints. Now there are other things that stabilize joints, such as ligaments, but the muscles help. And the nice thing about the muscles is you can exercise them and make them stronger. And in fact, this is one of the main objectives when you have physical therapy, or at least in some cases. Obviously, skeletal muscles create the force to help you move, and so you can move to a favorable location and make it more easier for you to survive. How do muscle systems affect other systems? So we already talked about warming up and moving. The muscles move and warm the integumentary system, and on the flip side, the integumentary system protects the muscles and helps cool them off through perspiration. Muscles can cause bones and joints to move, we mentioned that, and protect the bones. For example, biceps brachii protects the humerus. A lot of times we think of bones being protective, and they do in some cases, but sometimes the muscles reciprocate. Bones are where muscles attach. Bones also store calcium and phosphate, and the calcium is important for muscle contraction. Muscles move your eyes, allow us to speak and change facial expression for communication. The eye movement is useful in helping keep you from getting into danger. And also Pansy does eye rolls at me occasionally to express frustration with how dumb I can be. Nerves are going to control some muscles anyway, especially the skeletal muscles. And we have receptors within the skeletal muscles, the proprioceptors, that send sensory input to the brain to give you some feedback on the position of your body. Muscles can protect glands as being superficial and kind of a bumper for them. The glands produce hormones that can cause muscles to get larger. Epinephrine causes the heart to contract. Epinephrine comes from the gland's adrenal gland, and it also the epinephrine can cause vessels to constrict, which can distribute the blood throughout the body. Muscle contractions cause pressure to move blood within the vessels and the heart itself. The blood is going to bring nutrients and oxygen to the muscles and remove the waste products, especially carbon dioxide, but also nitrogenous wastes and things of that nature. Skeletal muscle pump, we talked about that. It creates pressure gradients that can move lymph as well as the blood. And the immune system can actually benefit by physical activity, and so there the muscles are helping you with your immune capabilities. Lymphatic system is going to remove debris from fluids, and it moves the fluids from the tissues back to the circulatory system. And those immune properties not only going to get debris out of the system, but they prevent infections. Okay. Excuse me. Muscle contractions are going to be important for breathing, so they impact the respiratory system. And exercise can increase your lung capacity. Lungs, on the other hand, reciprocate by providing oxygen for the muscles and removing carbon dioxide from the blood. Smooth muscles are going to move material within the gastrointestinal tract and facilitate diffusion, or digestion rather. The skeletal muscles are going to protect the abdominal organs and support them. Gastrointestinal tract reciprocates by providing nutrients, glucose, for the muscles. Also, the liver can metabolize lactic acid if lactic acid builds up, and convert it into useful molecules for normal aerobic activity. Lactic acid tends to build up when you're running anaerobically. Smooth muscle contractions help empty the urinary bladder. They protect and support the urinary organs. Kidneys are going to reciprocate by maintaining normal levels of the ions in our blood, the sodium, potassium, and calcium. And they're needed. These are needed for excitation, for normal action potentials. Also, the kidneys can excrete creatinine. Sorry. The smooth muscles contractions are going to help pump the male gametes from their site of formation in the testicles to where they can be fertilizing an ovum within the female. And then once a fetus has gone to full term, the skeletal and smooth muscle contractions help during childbirth. The hormones produced by the endocrine glands can promote skeletal muscle growth. We talked about that. So this gets us through the Quiz 7 on myology, third part, and I hope you'll find this to be useful in preparing yourself for the Quiz 7 and for the bonus Quiz 7, and also for the material that will be on the exam that this material is covered on. Have a great day. PNC has already gone into a coma, and we'll see you guys in class.